No tengas miedo. No tengas miedo.
We are talking The Old Ways, directed by Christopher Alender. And this is kind of a exorcism movie. And the story here is we have this American-Mexican journalist who has travelled back to her kind of where she came from her childhood. And she's gone into these like forbidden caves and has potentially been infected by some type of demonic force. But she is held captive, stroke helped, by a group of people, one of which is her cousin, who want to try and exorcise this demon out of her. And they're led by this witch, which they call the Bruja. And, you know, the whole movie is essentially an exorcism. So we see kind of like possession films and things like this. And normally you have the kind of the exorcism scene. This movie is essentially a whole exorcism scene, really, because it just takes place with them trying different things in regards to trying the exorcism, different approaches, and what will happen, you'll have to watch the movie to find out. One thing that I think this movie does quite well is, at least initially, it kind of like makes you question whether this person is possessed or not. Because she seems absolutely fine. It's not like she's in a lot of possession movies that the kind of the person who is possessed is, you know, flailing around with spewing pea soup and twisting their head around and things like that. She's just kind of seems practically, you know, normal. And the added wrinkle here is that she appears to be addicted to heroin. So is her kind of behaviour actually linked to being withdrawn from kind of heroin because they're kind of keeping her captive? Or is there genuinely a demonic force at work here? As the film progresses, you'll get the answer to that, but, you know, you're kind of watching a horror film, so I think you can probably guess where it's going to go. But I like the idea here, and I think it does it actually quite well. Well, you do question whether she's actually possessed, or whether she's kind of like, you know, are these people just stuck in the old ways? And there's an interesting kind of narrative thread, which, to be honest with you, I don't think they go in far with this, where they suggest that previous kind of like people who have tried to be exorcised and things like this, maybe they could have been helped better with modern medicine. You know, maybe the old ways have actually been part of the problem because they've lent into the kind of like the spiritual side of it and ignored modern medicine and actually tried to help people, but in doing so prevented them from getting the proper medical care. I think it's an interesting ethical question that the movie raises, but doesn't really do much with. It's kind of raises it and it's kind of not really talked about again after that. But I like the fact that it was kind of at least brought up. I have to say I thought the acting was pretty good from the cast here. And there's some good moments in this film. As I said, I quite like the fact that it kind of raises those ethical questions. Another kind of sequence that I liked is relatively earlier on, we have this woman who's kind of being held against her will at the end of the day, waiting to kind of be exorcised. And to try and kind of get out of it, she sort of pretends to be kind of, you know, oh, the demon's coming, blah. And she's kind of just pretending to try and kind of get out of it. And I don't know, it's one of these things where I think you don't see that as much. And it's kind of one of those things I think in horror films. And there's always like, you know, for example, in Shaun of the Dead, where they pretend to be the zombies. And it's just like you can pretend to be these certain things to try and get out of it. Again, it's kind of an element that I quite liked. Because this movie is one whole exorcism ultimately, you do get into a little bit of the minutiae of it and kind of how it would affect people. Both the people doing it and the people being affected by it. So you kind of get a little bit more of a kind of like a good sense of what the kind of the process is and kind of what the sort of the effects of it was, and ultimately the toll of how these things might affect someone physically, mentally, and stuff like that. I've got to say, I think the location shooting is very good here. This kind of dingy kind of like hut that they're in, I think works wonders in kind of giving you the kind of a claustrophobic, but also very kind of rustic and sort of, you know, out of the way feel, which I think works well. When we do see the effects, They're not the most high budget effects, but I actually think they're relatively effective for what they actually do. And I think with the kind of the demonic scenes that we do see do look quite good, albeit a little bit CGI, but forgivable for this kind of level of film, I would say. So what doesn't work with this movie? As I've kind of alluded to, I do think there are some ideas here that could have been explored a little bit further, that maybe would have given this movie a little bit more depth, which, as I say, they mention, but it kind of don't do as much with it as I think they could have done. So that's a little bit disappointing. At the end of the day, though, I think this movie's main problem is it's very predictable. You know, you can kind of guess where this film's going. It doesn't really have any twists. Well, it does. It attempts to have a twist, but it's so clearly signposted that I don't think it really counts as a twist, to be honest with you. Maybe the movie thinks it does, but it really doesn't. So the plot is very straightforward. You can pretty much guess what's going to happen at the end of the movie. Even all the way through it, you can kind of get the ideas. You know, it has a few clever, smaller ideas here and there, but the general gist of the story, you'll know it's exactly where it's going. And I have to say as well, the plot relatively is quite slight, because it's just the Exorcism. It almost feels like an extended third act of another movie, where all you're seeing is the kind of the Exorcism just drawn out over the whole movie. And I actually think this movie would have benefited from having more to it. Maybe they could have had. There's a couple of flashbacks, and I have mixed feelings about flashbacks, but I think it would have been benefited to have more character work, perhaps, or a little bit more kind of going on in this story, because at the end of the day, there's not a lot to this film. I do think it's a well-made film, and I think it started off very strong. But when you realise this is really all the film is, and there's not much to it apart from this, you're thinking, oh, is this going to be it for the whole movie? It's just going to be this kind of exorcism where you think you're going 2 steps forwards but 1 step back, or and things kind of like that, and ultimately that's what it is. It's kind of like, yeah, it's the whole film is essentially the whole exorcism and stuff, just with kind of a few kind of other smaller scenes and stuff, but that's the basic 90% of the kind of the plot here. It's well made for what it is, but I don't think there's enough to it really for a really good and enthralling story. And there's a couple of kind of missed opportunities, and it's okay. So it's an above average film. I just feel like it's kind of, there should have been a little bit more to it than this. I just feel there's a little bit lacking in kind of narrative, and it's just a little bit obvious as well. So 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.